Welcome back to MVM, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we're excited to bring you a Kickstarter preview. This one is for Mysthea from Tabula Games, and it is very much an area control style game.
Yeah, and much like Tabula's last game, Barbarians, this has a good-sized footprint with a lot of really cool components that we'll explain here in a second.
So speaking of the components, this is very much in a prototype form. You're seeing a lot of wooden components. These are going to be replaced with miniatures in the game.
Yeah, we have a few of the miniatures here just for the monsters, which look amazing. So once those are implemented for all of the pieces, it's going to look pretty incredible.
So as I said, it is an area control style game. Within the game, you're going to be moving your champions and your troops and your golems through these 5 different unique islands. All the islands are different. However, each of them is broken up by 3 distinct regions. And these regions are represented by 5 different types of terrain. You have mountains and rivers and fog banks and forests. These regions are also represented by terrain cards, and there's 5 different types of terrain cards. It's kind of the timer in the game, but it also gives you a variable scoring every round. So in one round, the waterlands can be worth 2 victory points, but in the next round they can be worth 8 victory points.
Right, the other cool thing about the terrain is these islands are going to be moving around so much that unlike any other area control game or area majority game that I've played, you really can't count on where you're going to be at any given time. So to move around these things takes a little bit of layered thought.
In the center you have the game board. You're randomly going to set up these islands. As we said, you're just going to lay them on these dark circles. These islands have 3 different regions in them. You have a stack of encounter cards. These encounter cards are 2-sided. We'll explain these as we get into the game, but you're just going to randomly shuffle these and put them on the corner of the board. You have attunement cards. Each of these islands is represented by 1 distinct attunement card, which will give you victory points if you're able to attune on your turn.
Right. This also plays into how these islands move, because when you attune, it can really change things up.
At the top of the board, you're going to have more command cards. There's 3 eras in the game, or 3 rounds in the game that you're going to be playing through: Era 1, Era 2, and Era 3. Each round, it's going to be represented by a new and better deck of cards that you're going to be able to purchase into your hand. Now, this isn't really a deck building game because you never really have a deck, but you are buying new command cards that give you extended powers through the game. So you're going to be getting stronger and stronger through the course of the game.
Right, like Jeremy said, it's not a deck builder, but it does have a little bit of that feel from time to time, because not only are you acquiring those cards, but you're going to use that same set of cards each round.
Up at the top, you have a separate board up here called the event board. As we said, you're going to have a deck of 5 cards. These represent the 5 different terrain cards within the game. And then you have the other era cards here, and then you have all the different actions that you can typically take. Finally, you have the player board itself. Now, the player board across the top has a place for your experience. Also has a place for your energy, how you're going to track these things. Energy is typically used to be able to move around the board or use different abilities on your command cards. Your experience will allow you to do encounters in the game. And then you have slots for each of your individual miniatures in the game. You have your troops, your golems, your champion, and then you have your fortress tiles. These are kind of strongholds in the game where you can kind of fortify specific areas. And then you have areas for accessory cards. Now there's 4 different types of command cards in the game, and all of these will allow you to have unique abilities, but 2 of them specifically will go onto your actual player board and give you additional powers through the course of the game.
Right, and the cool thing about these command cards too is you're going to be using these to fuel the actions in your game, the entire game. But if you add them to your board, you're going to have an ongoing effect for a particular type of unit per se.
As I said, there's 4 different type of command cards in the game. They're different colored. Your red and your yellow are typically cards that you're going to be playing from your hand and getting a specific power for them. Your blue and your green cards are the ones that are going to be playing to your player board and giving you ongoing powers through the course of the game. So to set up the game, what's going to happen is each player is going to get 4 random cards, 1 from each of the different colors, from a giant deck of cards. So everybody starts with a completely unique hand of cards.
Yeah, this is really cool because this takes sort of variable setup to sort of a new height. First of all, these cards, they have an immense amount of different cards in this game. And the fact that you deal these out separately, a different one of each color to each player, is going to make it every single time you're going to get a different combination of those 4 starting cards. And then, of course, the command cards come out throughout the game as well.
And you also have your champion card. Each player is randomly dealt one of these. On the bottom of them, they give you an inherent ability through the course of the game. Your champion is basically your pawn in the game, and again, will be represented by a miniature.
Another cool thing about the champion is that it can get wounded throughout the game. And when it's wounded, it's going to be less powerful for area majority and area control. but it also has that innate power that you're not going to have access to for the rest of that round until it's healed up from round to round.
Yeah, each of your troops or your miniatures in the game are going to have inherent strength to them. Your troops have 1 strength, your golems have 2, your champions have 3, and then your fortresses will have 2 as well. So that's, again, going to be used for combat. You're going to start with 1 golem on your player board. That's someone that can be deployed out to the board. You're going to start with 2 troops. All 4 of your fortresses are going to remain on your player board. And then you're going to have a artifact. Now, this is pretty cool. At the start of the game, you're going to start with a specific turn order. Player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4. But depending on where you fall in the next round is dependent upon which one of these tiles you get. And these tiles will give you an inherent amount of energy right at the beginning of the round. So I'm going to start with 3 energy right to begin the game, whereas the last player is going to start with 6 energy.
Yeah, the other thing these tiles do are they signify an ability you're able to use throughout the game that does a couple different things, and we'll get to that in a moment. But once you use it, the tile flips, and then at a certain point each round, it might flip back.
And then the final thing you're going to do to set up the game is in reverse turn order. Each of the players is going to take their champion and place it anywhere that they wish on the board, making sure they don't place where another player has their champion, so it can't be on the same island. And then they're going to take their exploration token and place it on one of the circles on a different island. And each player will do that in reverse turn order.
Yeah, and the exploration token is going to come into play for one certain aspect of the game, but you're going to want to potentially get your champion to that marker in order to get into the encounter deck.
So on your turn, you're going to have a hand of cards in front of you. You'll always have a hand of cards at the start of every round. As I said, you'll have 4 of them at the start of the game. You're going to acquire more of them through the course of the game, so you're going to have more actions to be able to take. On your turn, you're allowed to take 1 main action and then 1 secondary action. You can take the main action before the secondary action, or you can take the secondary action before the main action. It's completely up to you. In the main actions, you have 3 possible main actions that you can do. I'll talk about the first one, and that's simply acting. When you act, you're allowed to pick any one of the cards from your hand and play it in front of you. That's just playing a card, and you get to do a couple of variety of things with it. The first thing you're going to notice on any card is that it has a command point value in the upper left-hand corner. That tells you how many action points you can spend in that turn. Those action points can be used for a variety of different things. It can be used to deploy troops. It can be used to recruit more troops from the supply on your player board. It can be used to move troops around through islands. And it can be used just to gain energy. So I could expend this whole card just to gain 2 energy. Let's first talk about movement, because movement's really important in this game. Anytime you move, you're allowed to move within one region to another region on the board. So I could take my guy and move from here to here or from here to here. That's always just taking 1 point of movement. However, to move from one island to another island, it has to be adjacent to where you're located. And then you have to move into a like type of terrain. So I could spend 1 movement to move here from water to water, or if I was on this location, I could move from fog to fog, since they're connected islands and they have the same type of terrain.
Right, and this is the very beginning of that sort of layered aspect to the movement that we were talking about at the beginning, because it gets kind of tricky at times because you need to plan your movement out. The other thing about movement is each piece is going to move in a different way. The troops are going to move 1 space. So you can use those action points. You have 2 action points. You can move 1 troop 1 space, another troop another space.
Right. Yeah, they're completely limited to 1 space for your golems and for your troops. Of course, fortifications can't move. They're locked into the location where they're built. Your champion is unique because if you have 5 points of movement, you can move him 5 times. He's the only person that you can move multiple times on a turn. Recruiting and deploying work kind of in the same way. When you deploy, you're deploying from your player board to where your champion is located. So they're always going to your champion's location. When you're recruiting, you're taking things from your supply and you're simply putting them onto your player board to be able to use in a future turn. Now, the number of recruit points, again, depends upon what you're recruiting. Troops only take 1 recruit point, golems take 2, and so forth.
And you can mix and match, too. So if you had 2 command points, you could recruit a troop for one of them, and then you could deploy that same troop for the other point.
Once you've used the command points, you have the capability of using the bottom part of the card. Every single one of these cards has some unique iconography on the bottom, and they all give you very different abilities. 2 of the cards specifically, let's talk about your blue and your green cards. Your blue cards and your green cards have a little number on the bottom right-hand corner of the card that tells you how much energy you have to expend to actually place that card to the bottom of your player or to your player board. Your blue cards are going to go over all of your deployment spots, and your green cards are going to go into your 3 possible accessory spots. These give you ongoing abilities through the course of the game.
Right, so you won't use those abilities right then during the act. You might use them on a future turn, or like Jeremy said, it might be an ongoing ability. The other thing about the blue cards is they are specific to the types of units that you have there. So there is a specific troop one. There's a specific champion one. So as you go through the different eras, you're going to find ones that you might want to take and even replace some of the cards that you already had on your board.
Your yellow and your red cards are instant effects. One of them is called tactical cards and the other one's called objective cards. These will give you abilities once. You pay whatever energy costs are required for them, and then they go into a discard pile. The great thing is, at the end of the entire round, you're getting everything that you use back in your hand. So you have a full hand of cards. Again, this isn't a deck builder. You're not pulling a certain number of cards. You have everything at your disposal at the start of every single one of those rounds. So that's Act. That's probably the hardest one to explain.
Yeah, Act is the hardest one to explain. It's the meat of the game, but there are some other things here, and they're not exactly throwaway turns either.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do on your turn is meditate. And in a lot of games, you think, okay, meditate, that's if I don't have anything to do in the act.
Right.
Well, it's not necessarily the case here, because in meditate, you're going to gain 3 energy, and that's significant. Getting 3 energy is huge. Like Jeremy said, you can play a card with a 2 on it and just get 2 energy. So if you meditate, you get 3 energy right off the bat. In addition, though, you're going to benefit from everywhere you've placed any type of unit.
Yeah.
So you get the 3 energy, and then you look, and each of these terrain spaces on these islands, the regions, is going to have an icon signifying maybe a victory point, maybe the ability to build a fortification.
Yep.
Some other things, energy, all sorts of things. You're going to collect all of those when you meditate. So once you get a lot of units out on the board, the meditate action can be very significant.
And the great thing about meditate too is you don't have to control those regions. You just have to have presence in them. So it's very important to spread out as quickly as you possibly can in order to get the most from the meditate action. The final main action that you can take is to develop. Now, to develop, you're simply going to look at the 3 available command cards that are in the upper left-hand corner of the board. You have 2 options with these cards. One, you can wipe the entire row and put them under the deck and deal 3 new cards. Or you can take the top card and add it to the end of that row. You then have the capability of buying 1, 2, or 3 cards into your hand. The value of those either costs 1 energy, 3 energy, or 5 energy. And you simply take those cards that you want and you put them in your hand and then refill back up to 3 spots. This is how you're going to be getting more command points. This is how you're going to be getting new abilities through the course of the game.
Yeah, and these cards, like we said, there's eras to these decks. So these cards ratchet up over time. The first era is going to have a lot of 1s, 2s, maybe some 3s in terms of the command points. But then you get into the range where there's some 4s, definitely some 5s.
And it gets very interesting too, because a lot of these cards will give you modifications to your troops and accessories that you can use. Speaking of accessories, once you're done with those main actions, or even before doing your main action, you're allowed to do one of 4 different secondary actions. One of them is to use an accessory. Now, if you have an accessory on your player board, you're allowed to use that ability. You can use 1 accessory every turn.
Right.
And 1 accessory only. Again, these allow you to modify a lot of different things within the game.
Yeah, and these are going to come into play at specific times. So you're going to want to take a look at all your accessories and think, okay, what's going to benefit me most right now? You're also going to want to build up towards that, because a lot of these have little engines built into them where you can like gain some energy and then use that energy in a way that no one else can. A lot of these cards basically allow you to kind of navigate the general rules of the game and benefit from some of the different things you do in the game. For instance, you might score points when you recruit. You might score points when you deploy troops. So you can build up a nice little sort of Tableau style game engine that you don't generally see in a area control game.
A secondary action you can take, and that's called to attune. To attune, you have to be able to use your artifact. As we said, your artifact has 2 sides to it. One side shows a glowing crystal and the other side shows a non-glowing crystal. Once you use your artifact, you can use it in 1 of 2 ways, to do an attunement or to start a battle. And once you do that, you flip it over, meaning you can't take another one of those 2 actions again, or secondary actions again. The first one is called attunement, and that's basically when you look at where your champion is located and you push him to the center of the board. This is going to allow you to rearrange the islands in a specific way. But you also get to look at what terrain or what island you're on, and then you get to collect one of the attunement cards according to that specific island. So in this case, I would take this card and I would get 3 victory points for every development that I have. These are one-time uses in a round. Once someone collects this card, they get those points, and that attunement for that island is done for the round. It will go back at the end of the round. The cool thing that happens here, though, is that if that player is locked into a position or is not in a good position to move on the next round, he can then move these islands in any way that he so wishes, and then put the island in a new location.
Yeah, and like we said at the beginning, moving those islands around is pretty significant because you're going to want to spread your troops around. Moving those islands is just as good, if not better, than moving some of your units at times. And one of the other things about moving is you're going to potentially be able to get your champion closer to the destination to get into that encounter deck.
Right. You want to talk about encounter?
Yeah, the encounter deck, when we've played this game, I've gone with the encounter deck quite a bit. When you move your champion to the location of your compass token, you're going to be able to take the top card off of the encounter deck. And the backs of these cards have all the information you need at first. You're going to see victory points straight up. So if you get to that location, you take this secondary action, you're simply going to take those victory points. Then you have one of a couple choices. And they either fall into the categories of fighting, negotiating, or talking, or looting, things like that. There's always two actions, and you're going to choose one of those. Then you're going to flip over and find out what happens, basically. There's not much of a narrative here, but what you're going to see is generally some benefits. Sometimes it's some interactive things where you might be able to launch some of the monsters to attack wherever they might be.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that fuel interaction in this game. This is just one of those, but you can generally use this to score a lot of points and also get some benefits along the way.
And one of the things that happens with these encounter cards is you do have to spend experience in order to gain them. The first one costs 1 experience. The second one costs 2, third one 3, and so forth. Experience is usually gained from doing the meditate action and controlling locations that allow you to get experience in the first place.
Yeah, the other thing about these things, and a number of different things in the game, Jeremy mentioned these attunement cards. One of the reasons to go after these encounters, there's good points to be had, but there's an attunement card related to one of these islands that's going to give me 4 victory points for every encounter card that I've accomplished throughout the game. So the other cool thing about these attunement cards is you're not only going there to get the points on those cards, but you're often going there to block an opponent from getting the points that they're going after.
And the final thing that you can do is to start a battle. Starting a battle is done in a location, any location where you have figures and another player has figures as well. What's going to happen here is that all the cards remaining in your hand when the battle starts, you're going to take them and put them underneath the table. And you're going to put possibly 1 card in your hand and possibly no cards in your hand. And then each player is going to reveal their card simultaneously. Now these cards have no inherent ability within the battle, but depending upon the color that you use gives you abilities, and all of those different things are across the top of the board here. If you use a red card, you gain the strength of that command. If you have a yellow card, you're allowed to retreat people away from that location. If you use a blue point, you're going to get victory points according to that card's value, plus any of the troops that you have there. And if you use a green card, you're going to gain energy equal to that card's value, plus any of the troops there.
Yeah, these battles don't...
There's no dice, which is fantastic.
There's no dice, and these don't roll out like a typical battle in a lot of these games. It's more of a tactical decision that you're making. You might think, I might win or lose, but I'm just going to grab some victory points, so I'm going to use a blue card.
Right.
You might want to retreat so that you protect your champion in some cases so he doesn't get wounded. There's a lot of different things here, and it's a really cool element to this game that doesn't overstay its welcome for sure. The battle's there, but it's not too much.
Battles are resolved with the person who has the highest strength. For every character they've killed, you're gonna match those strengths together, and then find out what the difference is, and you're going to get 2 points for every character that has been removed from the board or everyone that's retreated. And then if a champion is there that you've defeated, they're going to become wounded. It means they become tapped. They're only worth 1 strength instead of 3, and then they don't have their inherent ability for the rest of the round. They will become unwounded at the start of the next round.
Yeah, it's very deterministic. So if, like Jeremy said, if you don't like dice in your fights, this game's got you covered.
So what's going to happen is each player is going to take one of those main actions and one of those secondary actions. When it gets back around to the first player, they're going to reveal a new card, and they're going to do that round after round until all 5 of the terrain cards have been revealed. So a round can actually be 5 turns in a row, or it can be as long as 9 turns, depending upon how the cards come out. Now remember, the further you get into the game, you're going to have monsters in those too, which can extend out the rounds. A round won't end until all 5 of those terrain cards are revealed. One of the other important things is that on the board in one location, if a card is placed here and the round has an end, everybody has the ability to reflip their artifact card back over, which means they can do another attunement that round, or they can do another battle that round.
Yeah, and the cool thing about the way these rounds work is they can go a little bit longer at times, but you're going to get that power back potentially. That is, if you've used it. So you want to sort of judiciously spend that power when you can in those first 4 rounds or phases of the round, and then hopefully be able to flip it again. Other thing we didn't talk much about is these monsters that can come out, because these monster cards, starting with this one and going down, are going to get added to the deck every single round.
Yeah, and these monsters, once their card is flipped and placed on the board, one thing we failed to mention is that once the first player places the terrain card out here, a new one's going to be flipped, so you can see what's going to be coming out in a future round. If a monster activates, it's going to attack that specific island. Each of these monsters have a innate strength to them, and everyone's cooperating in order to beat them. The player who has the most strength will get higher rewards than the players with less strength. And if they lose, they're going to lose all their people.
Yeah, there's an opportunity here to score points for sure.
Yeah.
And some people are going to want to be part of that fight, and some people are not going to be part of that fight. If you find yourself alone on an island with a monster, these things have 11, 15, 13 strength.
Yeah.
So you better have a lot of your units, or you better be there with some other players.
Or moving off of that location. You'll have a full turn to be able to react and get off those locations if you're not able to defeat them. So at the end of the round, once the 5th terrain card is drawn, you're actually going to score points. And the way you score points is the player who controls each of the regions in these areas. Depending upon where these cards fall out, you're going to score points for them. So in one round, crystals could be worth 2 points, but in a future round, it could be worth 7 points. And each of these different terrains, not each island, but each specific terrain is going to score that many points. So in the game, there are 3 different crystal regions, 3 different water regions, and so forth. So all 3 of those regions will score points. There's a lot of points to be scored in controlling those regions and trying to figure out, okay, these 3 cards have come out early. I know what the last 2 ones are going to score for more victory points.
Yeah, and it forces players, too, to not just set their troops out on the board at the beginning of the game and leave them there.
Yes.
You really want to move around because, like Jeremy said, in round 3, water could score much more points than it did in round 1, so you're going to want to move around to adjust for that.
And there's 3 eras that you're going to be playing through. Each era is going to introduce a new monster. At the end of an era, though, what's going to happen is all the cards from the command pile will wipe. You're going to add a new era into it, which again are stronger cards. You're going to take one of the monsters. He's going to be placed into a new island, depending upon what island he is native to. His monster card's going to be added to this deck. It's all going to be shuffled, and you're going to start a new round.
Yeah, this is a really unique area control game with a lot of literally moving parts to it.
Yeah.
But it's not overwhelming by any means. It's really interesting puzzle that's going on here with the islands for sure.
The strength of the game too comes in the command cards. Every single one of these command cards does something different, which means that the more that you play the game, the more variables you're going to have, not only with the starting command cards that you have in your initial hand, which will be unique every single game, but also the champion that you have, the cards that come out, which cards you draft, what strategy you want to use, how the islands are set up, which monsters come into play, how these terrain cards come out. It's extremely variable.
Yeah, this is definitely not a one-note game. There's a lot of different routes to scoring your points, and it feels like a few different types of games too. Like Jeremy said, there's certainly area control first and foremost, but those cards really feel like a good old-fashioned engine builder for sure.
Absolutely. So guys, that is Mysthea from Tabula Games. It plays 2 to 4 players, plays in about an hour and a half, 2 hours. If you guys have any questions about it, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and everything else that we do, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.